The young man who called himself my nephew sat across from me, his smile a little too bright for the dim, dreary room of the nursing home. He leaned forward, placing a sheaf of papers and a cheap ballpoint pen on the rickety bedside table. "Aunt Ellie," he said, his voice oozing a practiced sympathy. "Mom, you know, Sarah, she's just so worried about you. This is just to let us manage things, make sure you're taken care of. It's just a formality." His eyes darted around my room, taking in the stained linoleum floor and the single, barred window that looked out onto a brick wall. He saw exactly what he was meant to see: a forgotten old woman in a state-run facility, a final loose end to be tied up. He pushed the papers closer, his finger tapping on the signature line. "Just sign here, and we can get you into a much nicer place. A private room, maybe one with a garden view." As his hand moved, the sleeve of his jacket slid back an inch. There, on the fleshy part between his thumb and index finger, was a small, crudely inked tattoo of a spider web. My breath caught in my chest, but my face remained a placid mask. My real nephew, Daniel, has a crippling fear of spiders. He wouldn't even step on one. He certainly wouldn't have one permanently etched onto his skin. This man was an imposter. My sister had sent a complete stranger to trick me into signing away the last thing I supposedly had to my name. He thought he was conning a helpless old woman out of her last asset. He had no idea he was handing me the final piece of evidence I needed to destroy my sister's entire world. You're probably wondering why my own sister would hire an actor to impersonate her son just to get a signature. To understand that, you have to go back to the beginning and understand the two lies our family was built on: that my sister was a saint and that I was a burden. From the moment I was born, I was the shadow that proved my sister was the sun. Sarah was 2 years older, born with blonde curls and a smile that could charm a snake out of its skin. Our parents treated her like a porcelain doll, their perfect creation. I, on the other hand, was plain, quiet, and observant. In their eyes, I wasn't just different, I was defective. Sarah's laughter filled the house. My silence was seen as sullen. Her C grade on a test was a sign of a creative mind, bored by academics. My straight A's were a sign I wasn't socializing enough. This dynamic was the wallpaper of our childhood. When Sarah wanted a new bicycle for her birthday, she got the most expensive one in the store, shiny and red. My birthday, 2 months later, was a quiet family affair because money was suddenly tight. I received a book, a sensible gift, while the payments for Sarah's bike continued. If a vase broke, it was my fault for leaving it too close to the edge, even if Sarah was the one who had knocked it over while chasing the cat. She would burst into tears, and our mother would rush to comfort her, shooting me a look of pure exhaustion and disappointment. "Eleanor," she would sigh, "why must you always cause trouble for your sister?" I learned early on that fighting back was pointless. My truth didn't matter. The family narrative had been written, and I was cast as the difficult, ungrateful child. Sarah was the golden child, destined for a wonderful life, and it was my role to make sure nothing got in her way. I became the family shock absorber, the one who took the blame, did the extra chores, and faded into the background so she could shine brighter. I was the designated caregiver when our parents grew old, sacrificing my own career opportunities, while Sarah lived a glamorous life in another city, calling once a week to tell our mother how stressful her life was. This pattern of her taking and me giving became so ingrained that no one even questioned it. So when our parents passed away, it was only natural that she would believe she was entitled to everything they had left behind, including my freedom. Our parents' lawyer, a kind old man named Mr. Henderson, read the will in his stuffy office a week after the funeral. To my surprise, and to Sarah's visible disgust, it was perfectly equitable. The house, the savings, the modest stock portfolio, it was all to be split 50-50. My parents, it seemed, had found some semblance of fairness in death that they'd never managed in life. Sarah sat beside me, rigid as a board. She didn't scream or cry. Instead, she placed a gentle hand on my arm and said, with a voice full of feigned concern, "Oh, Ellie, this is so much for you to handle. All these numbers and decisions. You must be overwhelmed." That was the beginning of her campaign. She started by telling our cousins I was not coping well. She informed old family friends that I'd become reclusive and was forgetting things. The narrative she spun was insidious and effective. I was the fragile, grief-stricken spinster who had spent her life as a caregiver and was now collapsing without that purpose. She, the strong, capable one, was stepping in to save me. One afternoon, she showed up at the house with a thick stack of papers and a notary she introduced as her friend. "Just some standard estate forms, Ellie," she'd said breezily, flipping through pages of dense legal text. "To allow me to talk to the bank on your behalf. It will make things so much easier for you." I was exhausted. The years of caregiving, followed by the sudden, sharp shock of grief, had left me hollowed out. I signed where she pointed, my hand moving mechanically across the pages. I didn't see the carefully buried, durable power of attorney document tucked in the middle. 2 weeks later, she came back with a small suitcase. "I've found a wonderful place for you to rest, Ellie," she announced. "A convalescent home. Just for a month or two until you feel like yourself again. I'll handle selling the house. You won't have to lift a finger." She drove me here, to this place that smelled of bleach and despair, and walked me to my room. She patted my hand at the door, her eyes shining with triumph, not tears. "I'll be back soon," she lied. She thought she had buried me alive. What she didn't know was that she had just given me the one thing I never had before, the time and the solitude to plan my revenge. My family saw me as the woman who never left her hometown, the quiet daughter who sacrificed her life to care for her aging parents. In their story, I had no ambition, no skills beyond cooking and cleaning. I was a failure to launch. What they never knew was that late at night, after my parents were asleep and the house was quiet, I lived another life. In the early 1980s, while Sarah was busy going to football games, I was teaching myself computer programming on a bulky machine our father had bought for his small accounting business. I connected online with another enthusiast, a college student named Mark. For years, we worked on a piece of data organization software. He was the face of the project. I was the silent, anonymous programmer. I took my payment not in cash, but in stock. It was a tiny startup no one had ever heard of. A decade later, that startup was bought by Microsoft. Mark passed away a few years ago, but his son, Ben, became my financial advisor and lawyer. He was the only person on earth who knew the truth, that the quiet, unassuming Eleanor Sterling was worth over $30 million. My parents' modest estate, the one Sarah was so desperate to control, was pocket change to me. I had kept my fortune a secret for one simple reason. I knew my family. If they had known, my money would have become just another thing for them to manage, to borrow against, to absorb into Sarah's black hole of need. My wealth was the only part of my life they hadn't touched, and I guarded it fiercely. When Sarah made her move with the power of attorney, my first call was to Ben. I could have stopped her right there. I could have waved my bank statements in her face and had the power of attorney nullified in an hour. But that felt too easy. It would have been a legal victory, but not a moral one. Sarah would have just claimed she was confused, that she didn't understand. She would have played the victim. So, I told Ben to stand down. "Let her do it," I said calmly. "Let's give her enough rope to hang herself. Track every penny." And he did. He watched as Sarah sold our family home, kept the entire $500,000 proceeds for herself, and used my half to pay off her credit card debt and her son's gambling losses, all while paying for this squalid nursing home with what she thought was my dwindling inheritance. Her greed was predictable, but eventually, the money from the house started to run out. And that brings us to the man with the spiderweb tattoo and the papers he wanted me to sign. I looked down at the document he was pushing at me. It wasn't for a bank account or a deed. It was a transfer of ownership for a single asset, Sterling and Sons Accounting LLC. My father's old accounting firm, which had been defunct for 30 years. After spending every last cent from the house sale on vacations, a new car, and her son's endless business ventures, Sarah had obviously hired someone to dig for any other assets under my name. And this is what they found. A worthless, forgotten shell of a company. To her, this was the final crumb at the bottom of the bag, and her greed was so all-consuming she couldn't resist taking that too. What Sarah didn't know is that our father, a man of simple habits but occasional strange foresight, had used the company decades ago to purchase the mineral rights for the entire 5-acre plot of land our house was built on. At the time, it was meaningless. But 2 months ago, a geological survey quietly commissioned by my lawyer, Ben, confirmed the land was sitting on one of the richest lithium deposits in the state. An energy company was prepared to pay $50 million for those rights. All Sarah saw was a defunct company name on a piece of paper. She thought she was taking on a worthless liability to finalize the estate. She was, in fact, trying to steal a lottery ticket. I looked at the young man, feigning confusion. "Sterling and Sons?" I asked, my voice thin and frail. "Goodness, that hasn't existed in ages. I thought it was worthless." "It is, Aunt Ellie," he said smoothly, the lie rolling off his tongue. "This is just a final piece of paperwork to close the books. It actually has some old tax debts tied to it. Mom is just taking it off your hands so you don't have to worry." I picked up the pen, my hand trembling just enough to be convincing. I looked into his cold, impatient eyes and saw a perfect reflection of my sister's soul. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the final act. With a slow, deliberate motion, I signed my name on the line. "There," I whispered, pushing the paper back toward him. "Tell Sarah I hope this helps." He snatched the document, a triumphant smirk flashing across his face before he could hide it. He thought he had just stolen the last worthless scrap from a helpless old woman. In reality, he had just accepted a signed confession to attempted grand larceny and felony fraud, and I had a high-definition security camera, disguised as a smoke detector above my bed, recording every single second of it. The door clicked shut behind the imposter, and the silence of the room settled around me. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. Then, slowly, I reached under the thin mattress of my bed. My fingers found the smooth, cool surface of a small burner phone I had hidden there months ago. I dialed the only number stored in its memory. It rang once before Ben answered. "Eleanor?" "It's done," I said, my voice no longer frail but firm and clear. "He has the signed transfer. The recording of the entire exchange is uploading to the secure server as we speak." There was a pause on the other end, then I could hear the faint sound of typing. "Understood, Eleanor." Ben's voice was crisp and professional. "I have everything I need. The fraud complaint and the emergency petition to invalidate the power of attorney will be filed with the court within the hour. I've already subpoenaed Sarah and her son, Daniel, for a mediation meeting at my office tomorrow at 2 p.m. They've been told it's a mandatory final settlement discussion for the estate. They'll come." "Good," I said, "because I'll be there too." The next day, just after lunch, a commotion broke out at the nurses' station. The facility administrator, a woman who had never bothered to learn my first name, was arguing in a hushed but frantic tone. A moment later, Ben appeared at my door, looking immaculate in a dark gray suit. He wasn't alone. 2 uniformed police officers stood behind him. He smiled calmly at me and handed the sputtering administrator a court order. "My client will be leaving with me," he stated simply. Then he turned to me and handed me a garment bag. "I believe these are yours." Inside was a tailored navy blue pantsuit, a cream-colored silk blouse, and a pair of sensible but elegant leather shoes. I changed out of the faded hospital gown, and with each button I fastened, I felt the last 5 months of manufactured helplessness fall away. I was no longer Ellie, the forgotten patient in room 2B. I was Eleanor Sterling, the woman who was about to reclaim her life. As Ben escorted me down the hall, the staff stared, their jaws slack. I walked past them without a glance. As we settled into the plush leather seats of his car, leaving the gray walls of my prison behind, I didn't feel anger or anxiety. I felt a profound sense of calm. Justice, after a lifetime of waiting, was about to be served. Ben's office was on the 30th floor of a glass and steel skyscraper downtown. The boardroom felt like a different universe from the nursing home I had just left. A long, polished mahogany table reflected the panoramic view of the city skyline. I sat at the head of the table, a position of authority, with Ben to my right. We waited in silence. I didn't need to review notes or plan my words. I had been rehearsing this moment in my head for 5 months. At precisely 2 o'clock, the door opened and my sister, Sarah, swept in, followed by her son, Daniel. Sarah was dressed in a designer coat I instantly recognized, having seen the $3,000 charge on the credit card statements Ben had been collecting. Daniel, my actual nephew, was a pale, sullen version of his mother, eyes already glued to his phone. They were expecting a quick meeting with a lawyer to sign off on some final papers. They were not expecting me. Sarah stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me. The color drained from her face. Her perfectly painted smile froze, then crumbled. "Eleanor," she gasped, her voice a strange mix of shock and fury. "What are you doing here? You're not well. You should be in the home, resting." She was already trying to reassert her control, to force me back into the box she had built for me. I simply looked at her, my expression unreadable. "I've never felt better, Sarah," I said, my voice even and cold. "What's going on, Mom?" Daniel whined, finally looking up from his phone. "Who is this guy?" Ben stood up. "Please, have a seat," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sarah and Daniel hesitated, then took the chairs at the far end of the table, as far from me as possible. "We are here to discuss your management of Ms. Eleanor Sterling's affairs," Ben began, opening a file in front of him. "Let's start with the durable power of attorney, which you used to commit your sister to the Northwood Convalescent Home. As of 9 a.m. this morning, that document was summarily invalidated by a judge on the grounds of fraudulent inducement." Sarah let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "That's insane. I was acting in my sister's best interests. She was and is mentally incompetent." Ben simply nodded and picked up a remote control, pointing it at the large monitor on the wall. "Let's review your definition of best interests, shall we?" he said calmly. "We can begin with the financial records starting the day you sold the family home." The screen flickered to life, displaying a bank statement. At the top, a deposit for $500,000, the full proceeds from the sale of our parents' home. Sarah shifted in her seat. "The money is safe," she said, her voice a little too high. "It's in a high-yield savings account." "Is it?" Ben replied coolly, clicking the remote. A list of withdrawals appeared, each one highlighted in red. "Because these records show a $50,000 wire transfer to American Express, paying off a balance in your name, Sarah. They show a $25,000 cashier's check made out to a luxury car dealership, and a series of cash withdrawals, totaling over $30,000, all made from ATMs located inside the Majestic Star Casino." Ben paused, letting the information sink in. "Interestingly, the only payments made on behalf of Eleanor were the monthly checks of $3,500 to the nursing home, a facility you were paying for with her own money, while you spent the other $230,000 of her inheritance on yourself." "I was going to pay it back," Sarah shrieked, her composure shattering. "It was a loan. I was protecting her assets." Daniel sank lower in his chair, his face the color of chalk. He looked at his mother, expecting her to fix it, but she was cornered, her lies collapsing around her. "A loan requires the consent of the lender," Ben said flatly. "Which brings us to your most recent attempt to protect your sister's assets." He clicked the remote again. The bank statements vanished, replaced by the grainy, high-definition video from my room. We all watched the man with the spiderweb tattoo walk in. We heard his smooth, practiced lies. We saw the close-up of the fraudulent document as he pushed it toward me. Sarah let out a small, strangled gasp. The screen showed me signing the paper, my hand shaking convincingly. Then it showed the man's triumphant smirk as he walked out. Ben paused the video on that smirk. "This is Mr. Michael Rossi," Ben said, his voice dropping. "He's a known associate of your son, Daniel. He is currently in police custody. In exchange for leniency, he has provided a full confession, detailing how you both hired him to impersonate your son and fraudulently obtain what you believe to be the last of your sister's assets." The room was utterly silent. There was nothing left to deny. The evidence was absolute, a digital tombstone on my sister's life. After a long, heavy moment, I finally spoke, my voice calm and quiet. "Was it worth it, Sarah?" My quiet question hung in the air, and something inside Sarah finally snapped. Her face, which had been pale with shock, contorted into a mask of pure rage. She stood up so violently, her chair scraped backward. "Worth it," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You did this. You were always like this, sitting in the corner, watching, judging. You were always jealous. You had nothing, and I had everything, and you couldn't stand it. You never wanted me to be happy." Her voice rose to a frantic screech, all the years of her pent-up entitlement boiling over. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you? Saint Eleanor, sacrificing for everyone. But you were plotting this all along." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I looked her directly in the eye. "You didn't have everything, Sarah," I said, my voice cutting through her tirade. "You just took everything. There's a difference." "That's enough," Ben said, his voice firm. He stood and addressed my sister and nephew, who was now openly weeping. "The district attorney is pressing charges. For you, Sarah, that includes felony fraud, grand larceny, and financial elder abuse. For you, Daniel, conspiracy to commit fraud and uttering a forged instrument. You'll be taken into custody when you leave this room." Sarah swayed on her feet, grabbing the table for support. "Furthermore," Ben continued, "we are filing a civil suit for the full recovery of the stolen $250,000 plus punitive damages and legal fees. We will seize your house, your car, and garnish any and all future wages." He let that sink in before delivering the final crushing blow. "And as for the worthless company you had Mr. Rossi fraudulently acquire yesterday—" He paused and looked at me. I leaned forward slightly. "You always did look down on Dad's little business," I said to Sarah, whose eyes were now wide with a new kind of dread. "You thought it was as worthless as you thought I was. But that company owns the complete mineral rights to the land our old house was on. An energy corporation is finalizing an offer to purchase those rights for $50 million. The number hit her like a physical blow. A choked, guttural sound escaped her throat. It wasn't just the loss of her freedom or her home. It was the sudden, horrifying knowledge of the fortune she had been too arrogant and too greedy to see. The life she could have had, gone in an instant. At a subtle nod from Ben, the boardroom door opened, and the two police officers stepped inside.